Hi everyone, welcome to a Music with Melos Han-Tani. Today we're talking about the songs from Anodyne 2, Center City Cenote. If you've played Anodyne 2, you're probably familiar with this song. It's one of the first songs that plays in the game. I wanted to just talk a bit about its composition. So the first thing before talking about a song is I need to talk about the origin of it a little bit. So this song started when the art style of the game wasn't quite well defined yet, meaning that we only had concepts and ideas and there wasn't any final art in the game. So I brought up a few of the early drafts of the song. Here's the earliest one. It's totally off the mark, but it's still a good song. So this was kind of just a rough guess about what this area would need based on story and kind of just some concept arts. It ended up being more or less scrapped, and then I kind of moved on to earlier areas in the game, so the albuminium and yolk areas. This is one of the earliest versions of the albuminium. It's a lot darker than was expected, and that's because we didn't really have that section of the game nailed down yet in terms of text. And so I came back to it about a month later, and this draft is a lot closer. It has elements that the final version of the albuminium song had. And the reason I bring this up is that a later draft, it eventually evolved into a later draft of albuminium. And if we skip ahead into the middle of it, like near the end, it's going to end, but it's going to transition to something familiar. Kind of this fast version of Center City Cenote. The melody is like underdeveloped and it's different. But the point is that was kind of one of the origins of the melody in the Center City Cenote song. And I want to also play the yolk area song. You'll notice the melody here uses a pentatonic scale. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. It's just the idea is that the structure of the melodies in the nano area kind of resembles the structure of the melodies in the final Cenote song. One more note on the origin of the melody. I was listening to a lot of this Susumi Hirasawa song, so I don't get a copyright strike, but I'll just skip to the important part. A little bit louder. But in this song, he uses pentatonic scales for melodies, but then he also will go off of the scale into kind of a normal diatonic scale. And I liked that change. This melody right here, and that's kind of what I was thinking about in terms of melody. I like his songwriting a lot. But yeah, I think that's enough on background of the song. So I want to play a bit of one of the second to last drafts of the song, just so we can compare. You can tell this draft is a lot higher in pitch than the final draft. The rest of this old draft is pretty much the same. The only difference is that the old draft is missing a lot of this like second half. The reason, just to say what happened in between those drafts, is that I pitched the music all down because I wanted to kind of make these sections a little bit more like present and powerful. And that's harder to do when everything in the song is a lot higher in pitch. Okay, so we can pretty much move on to actually talking about the song. So if you just tuned in, I just talked about the origins of the song, which I think is important for context. So we need to talk a bit about what I'm going to be going over. I'm not actually going over a lot of music theory because I only know a little bit. I know a lot of basic music theory and a little bit of like jazz stuff and like chord names, but it's not a vitally important part of the composition process. Although I do care about chords and that kind of stuff, but it's more on an intuitive level. So it's hard for me to kind of teach that stuff. But if I can remember anything, I will mention it. This isn't really going to go into mixing or mastering because I'm not particularly good at those. I'm good enough at doing it, to kind of fit in instruments where needed, but I'm not a professional at those things. So this video is not for that. We're mainly going to be talking about how this became a good video game song and how that was achieved. So the first thing to talk about is the context of the song. It starts near the start. It plays near the start of the game. It's in a wide open area. You spend a few hours there, maybe. So it needs to not feel repetitive. Most video game music, as a rule, if it's going to be looping in a very traditional way, it should not be repetitive, meaning that it means a lot of things, but that's just the general guideline. So that's kind of the narrative context, and it's always important to know the narrative context making, like kind of the mood the game's supposed to be in. So the style of the song, it needs to sound a little bit safe and comfortable. That's kind of like safe, a comfy melody, to kind of represent Nova, the character, and how she's being cared for by these guardians, kind of in this idealized part of the game's world. At the same time, we want to also kind of go into a bit of the the kind of the braveness of Nova, which is why we have this sort of like soaring, brave melody. And this area in the game is positive in general, so that's why a lot of these songs are warmer. Warmer, what that kind of tends to mean is that there's a lot of like lower frequency material in the song around here in terms of, I'm not really going to explain that stuff in this video. Yeah, I mean, you intuitively know what warmer means. Expansive, it's the beginning of a new game world. You've kind of come out of very closed areas. So we want to have kind of an adventurous feel, which is, this useful baseline. It has this kind of 3/3 like a slightly syncopated, which gives a sense of adventure. Forward motion. Forward motion is one of those like buzzwords you can use to describe music or games, but it's kind of the sense of like, oh, it has a lot of energy building forward. The sounds have a lot of reverb, meaning they sound like they're in a big open space. But at the same time, the song isn't too cheery. For example, this melody it's using a pentatonic scale, so it can kind of like drift in between more like negative feel and more positive feel. And these things combined with some other aspects of the song that I'll go into, those can be used to push the mood a little bit away from completely cheery. So it's kind of nice in a song, at least in a narrative context in the game, like in Line 2, where you're kind of, you want to sound hopeful, but you kind of want to get at the sort of negative tones that underlie the story. It's good to have some, some parts of the song that kind of shift the mood to be a little bit more ambiguous at times. So, for example, this pad here. This kind of sounds a little bit sad, right? That kind of helps to reduce the positiveness, something like this. That's kind of just generally the idea. It's not something that's like, I think about it, but it's not like a mathematical rule. You kind of just like slide the notes around until you get across what you want. Okay, so this song plays over a very long period of time, meaning in the game. So this is generally an approach I take in game music, but I don't want too much mood variation in the chords. So the chords of a song generally drive the mood of the song, and it's good to start with the chords sometimes. So this accompaniment track helps to define sort of the chords of the song. They're arpeggiating the chords. Those repeat through the whole song. There is a little bit of variation, but that more or less helps me control the mood within a certain range. What else? Yeah, so when you're trying to get across a certain mood, you don't want to move around the chord spectrum too much, unless it depends on the game. But if we're in an adventure game, background music, I kind of want to limit the musical feelings to a certain range of emotions. So I won't jump around and do dynamic chord changes. It's also, since this is a big important part of the game, we also want the melody to be iconic. So there's not a lot of super experimental stuff going on in this song. This is one of the more straightforward songs, I would say. Straightforward in terms, there's a focus on the melody, there's a pretty clear-cut structure. Yeah. So that's where my notes on kind of context and style. We can finally start talking about the song's structure. So we'll start from the beginning. And let's go ahead and listen through all the parts. But not all at once, but one at a time. That's the intro of the song. It isn't that remarkable. It introduces the chords of the song. It also introduces some of the kind of emotional tension, the notes in these chorus pads, going against what I'm calling this flute mallet decay. I'll talk a bit about sound design near the end. I'll just skip over that for now. That leads into the first theme. Okay, sorry, it's kind of late here, so I'm tired, but right, so the scale used in this melody, right, that's influenced by those songs I alluded to earlier. And So there's some kind of like motif overlap between those songs. One note about this melody is it's supposed to feel, kind of cheerful and like free floating. So if you zoom in, I recorded this melody actually playing on a keyboard, and I did not quantize the notes. Quantize means to like align it with the beat. So if I quantize, you'll see they kind of like shift a bit. And that gives it an unsteady sort of feel. And I think that gives it a more casual, kind of like playful tone. Some people will disagree with this, but I disagree with them. Each their own, not really. Okay, yeah. Some notes on the melody here. There is a lot of ways to write melodies. You'll notice that this kind of centers around G sharp and C sharp. Those are kind of like the stable points of the scale or something. I don't really know if that's theoretically true, but it feels like it. And so, I'll veer off from G and C sharp, like right now. Then veering off creates tension, and you always return to the C. Especially going up to this A sharp. And that kind of just helps create interest in the melody. Right, so theme A, or theme 1, gets established here, and then we transition to theme 2. Which actually trades off between two instruments. This section is emphasizing sort of like bravery, those kinds of things with Nova, a sense of adventure. And it just repeats. So what's going on here, right? Basically, we started off kind of calmer, brought in the melody, get something going on, and then we have this section here, which is sort of like the energetic climax of the song. And what we do to kind of create the energy is, I think I go into it in more details in my notes, but here, we have this chord stab flute mallet, I'm calling it. We also have this bass line. As you can see, these are aligned rhythmically. So these chord stabs also emphasize the rhythm of the bass line. The bass line is designed to give a sense of adventure, so that's kind of reinforcing the two. And that's useful because in this song, there isn't any percussion being used, right? This is a stylistic choice. So, but it's useful to have rhythmic information for the listener so they kind of know the context to interpret what they're hearing. We also have this sort of a harmonic accompaniment. What it's doing is, it's emphasizing the chords we're on, the same two sets of chords, but it's also kind of has this like orderly marching feel, which emphasizes, I think, the rhythmic sense of bass and yeah. So some notes on the melody here. Again, you'll kind of see the melody go into these notes that are quote-unquote off-key. And that creates some interesting kind of like extra mood. There's also a call and response between these two instruments here. That's good if you don't want to have too much different melodic material. That's useful when we're kind of just using two sets of chords, right? And it's hard to develop a complicated melody around that, so it's useful to repeat some of the melodic structure here. So if you look at these 4 sections here, see they kind of follow like a shape. And a good way to kind of do this sort of thing is to have every other repeat and alternation of the melody be lower. That's higher, is lower. And I use different instruments just to distinguish it, to keep things not as boring for people listening. Yeah, I think that's most of what's going on right now. Let's go ahead to this, playing the fake outro. So if you listen to this, you could actually loop the beginning of the song. Let's pretend to do that, okay? So it's gonna loop to the start of the song. It's a little bit rough, right? But it would work in theory. So it feels like the song's ending, but it's actually just repeating the intro, which is why I call it kind of like a fake outro. And what this is actually marking is the song. You can actually think of this whole song as being split into 2 parts. What I'm calling sort of the movement part of the song, the more emotionally dramatic part of the song. And then this kind of like stability part of the song just emphasizes the more positive moods of the song. So this outro is kind of emphasizing that we're transitioning into this section, which is eventually going to loop. There's not going to be a lot of melodic development. Yeah. So one way you can kind of, why I say it sounds like an outro is that if we look at this flute mallet decay here, see it's using, yeah, so this is the beginning of the song. It's using these higher notes, whereas this similarly structured accompaniment is not using those higher notes. So it sounds more subdued and it sounds like it's winding down. But it's not winding down, right? It's actually there's gonna be a little bit of build. And is what happens at the end of this section when we get into theme 2B. This is called theme 2B because the structure of these notes is, first of all, there's a call and response going between these 2 sections. But this call and response is a lot closer than it was before over here. They kind of overlap a bit. But these are actually, I think, almost the same instruments. That's why I call it theme 2B. It also kind of borrows some of the melody. More of like this one. So what's happening here is that I'm borrowing and modifying an earlier idea in the song and using it in a more compact way here. But you'll notice that what I removed is I removed this more dramatic part in the melody. We only hear these more positive notes. It doesn't go any higher. And that kind of helps keep this whole section's mood more constrained to the narrow range of emotions that we want. That kind of helps the song feel more in the background, and it helps to prevent the listener's ear from being as tired. Let's see. introducing an idea. There's an idea I'm introducing starting in 2B, which is this delay high flute instrument. What it is, this is actually a higher pitched version of chord arpeggiation. And the reason doing that is I want to introduce. Well, let me play first, both parts first. So I want to introduce this like high flute accompaniment as a harmonic texture later. So I'm getting some of it here so that I can kind of introduce it earlier. Kind of hint at it and transition. So after 2B, we get a repeat of the melody from the start of the song. The only difference is that on this instance of the theme 1, there is reverb and other stuff added to the sound to make it feel a bit more fuller. And part of that is because we don't want the song to sound too empty, and the CAD over here is a lot quieter in the later part of the song. Let's see. Yeah. So you'll notice, so again, going back to this like high flute part here, it's technically not needed, I guess, but if you remove it, there's not as much of a sense of building and kind of like emphasizing the positive mood. It's a little bit more flat, a little bit more boring, which is why I doubled it up and changed the instrument. Yeah, so after this, what's going on in this whole outro is that these two chords are just repeating, and then we're returning some of the old melodies, adding on layers, but ultimately the mood is not really. We don't get any of that exciting rhythmic stuff going on earlier in the song. And then the next part of the sort of second half of the song is a synth solo of sorts. So the point of the solo is to act as a transition between transition to the ending. Technically, when you have a chord progression like this, you can just keep repeating it over and over again. The song could go on forever, and the listener probably wouldn't really mind, because the chords we're using here are actually, it's a simple progression that kind of creates and lets go of like slight amounts of tension, and you can repeat it over and over. By having this flute solo, it can kind of transition from the major melodies of the song into kind of a more subdued melodic content. I'm also using a softer instrument here, or more feathery instrument. Compared to this one, a little bit more keyboard-like, more mallet-like. Yeah, so the solo, I don't know, you can pretty much do whatever you want. I incorporate a little bit of the melodic content of this quote-unquote solo. but it doesn't really matter. And you can actually repeat the solo section as much as you want, but I wanted to go to the outro. I didn't want this to drag on too long. The melody, the outro, nothing too new. The one thing is that the arpeggiated chords, the lower ones, they drop out so that we can only have the higher ones, and that makes the song feel like it's coming to an end. There's also no major melody going on. We have this sort of fancy fancy harmonic content going on, and that's kind of just a nice extra layer, higher pitched layer that's useful for, you can fade it out, and it just helps keep the song a little bit interesting. Yeah. And then the song loops from here. Yeah, so that ends the discussion of the song's content. There's actually more. This is going on a lot longer than I thought it would. Like almost a full class lecture. Okay, so most important stuff. Let's talk about sound design a little bit. This lead here, what's going on, right? We have a echo effect in Ableton. There's actually some modulation on the delay time, and in this delay plugin that actually creates some pitch variation. I'm also in the synth itself using a LFO to change the position of the wavetable sampler, which creates a little bit of interesting harmonic content. There's also this unison mode in Ableton's wavetable that adds more interesting kind of mixed partials to so if I don't have it on, it's more flat. Sounds a little too religious or something. Yeah. Baseline. Nothing fancy. Just kind of this rough sound that I'm filtering out the higher frequencies. Get rid of that buzzing. Okay, yeah, let's talk about these pads. These chorus pads. Well, they're helping to establish the mood of the song in the beginning, but they're a lot harder to hear later in the song. What they're actually accomplishing here is they're kind of filling out some of this frequency range here. It's making the song a little bit more muddy and warmer, which helps for that kind of sense of coast. Let's say I take it away, like over here. Now it's off. There's just a little sense of like something missing when it's not on. And that's a useful way to use pads and instruments is to kind of, you can make them quiet and subtle enough to not really be a part of the melodic content, but enough to kind of give a sense of presence listening. That help the song feel fuller in certain ways. Flute. I need to talk about flutes. Okay, so if you've been looking at the side of these track names, I'll say like flute, flute, flute. What's going on there? Well, there's a chrono trigger sample of the flute that I'm using. And this doesn't really sound like a flute, right? Because I'm changing how I'm sampling it. I'm making it more into a mallet by changing the envelope, but also where the sample is starting from. So, if I change the start of the sample, it sounds like a flute. And in this case, that sounds really bad, but I like this flute sample because of kind of the end of it, so I can use this to make a lot of different. Have that kind of more melody bouncy lead. Later in the song, actually, later in the song, more of like a string because I'm changing the envelope of it. I don't have time to go into those fundamentals right now. I'm even using it in the end here. This is just a flute. The only difference is that I turned the glide on. Glide, or glissando, whatever you want to call it, is just a setting that I think any good synth should have glide available to use. It just makes it so the notes kind of slide in between each other. Gives that slidey feeling. Sound kind of cheesy in certain contexts, but it sounds okay here. What else? I think the flute is used everywhere, like here too. Here I'm using it more higher pitch, actually used down here too. Everything's a flute. These are all flutes. The flute? No, it's not. This is a chorus pad. But yeah, so basically, you can pick one sample, and if you want the whole song to cohere, you can use the same sample and just change how you're sampling that sample. Yeah. Okay, the last thing before we wrap up is I want to talk a bit about the effects that we're using here. I haven't really talked about any of these. The first thing is that you can use kind of like recordings to emphasize the atmosphere of your song. For example, in the beginning I have a recording of lakes. And I think those kind of subtly help paint the mood of the song, and they go along with the area they're in. Also later, using these white noise, filtered white noise, it's pretty hard to hear. Yeah, okay, you can hear it a little bit. For that, I'm just sampling some noise. I don't know where it's from. Where's the noise? It's from an Ableton pack. It doesn't really matter. Sending it through reverb, delay. If I don't have those on, it sounds a lot rougher. Doesn't have that illusion of waves. And then filtering out parts I don't want. Next. No, there's not really like a logical reason for doing it. One reason for trying to synthesize your effects is you control them a lot better than you would with a actual sample. But generally you can kind of add this stuff in intuitively. It doesn't really a science to it. But it's useful to kind of open up and convey the feeling of adventure. Especially once you've kind of established the mood of the song, you can remove them. So like in the second half of the song, there's none of these samples. And it's kind of because we don't really need them anymore. We have established the context for how the song should be interpreted, and we don't really need them. There's these effects. What are these doing, right? Formally or emotionally, this kind of like downward pitch envelope effect, it helps add imagery to the song and also give them sort of emphasizes the dramaticness of it. It's a very like dramatic, kind of like melodramatic sound. Maybe like yearning a bit. And I add those in to sort of help create more contrast against a very subtle extra drama to this section. And I also use it here to transition from one part of the outro to the next. Yeah, and that's nothing that fancy about it. There's an LFO that's modulating the frequency of a filter. That's useful for giving some texture to the sound. Do what I mean. If I don't have it on, there's a little bit less kind of roughness to it, and I think that's more boring. The pitch envelope is just made so that when the note releases, the pitch goes down a little bit. That's how you get that effect. There's also this like sparkly effect. How does the sparkly effect work? Well, first of all, why does it even exist, right? So we're putting this in here as extra harmonic content song. This is a higher pitched thing, and in this song, in this part of the song, there's nothing really as higher pitched. This helps to fill that section up and make it feel more complete, but also add an interesting kind of starry, spacey texture. And the texture is done with some plugins. So the first thing is just a normal, like, simple waveform that I'm drawing an operator with some partials to give it some grittiness. And I have an LFO, which just modulates the volume. So, meaning the volume will go up and down really fast. And that's useful for later when we're going to be delaying it. We don't want there to be like a huge wave of sound. Versus, so if I don't have the LFO, I get much more of this kind of like a pad sound. With LFO on, the volume is gone for some of that time, so the grain delay is able to do a lot more interesting effect. And lastly, we have this corpus thing. This is an Ableton plugin. I'm not 100% sure, but it sort of like sends the sound through like it's resonating on like a string or something. I don't really. There's another synth Ableton uses that uses this algorithm, and it makes like mallet sounds. You can send sounds through corpus and makes them sound different. It's really hard for you to. If I don't have it on, it's a lot more present because the corpus is both filtering out a lot of the part of the sound, so you only hear some of the high parts, and it's also doing some string thing to it. I'm not really sure, but what that helps to do is it makes the grain delay more interesting. Because there's more sparser content going in from the synth to the grain delay. It gives it that kind of like sparkly, spacey feel. And you can mess around with the settings on the grain delay. Grain delay is really good for textures, those kinds of things. Oh wow, it's been 45 minutes. I can't believe it. Okay, I need to wrap this up. Go to sleep. So that's actually pretty much it. Wow, great. One last thing is that maybe I'll mention that in the future. But yeah, thanks for listening to this Music with Melos, the first one. I will do other songs later. Pastel Horizon has been requested. If there's any songs you want me to do from any games, let me know, and I will maybe do them. There's these a long time, so I won't do them that often. But yeah, hopefully this is useful and enlightening in some way. If you need anything, let me know. Like, comment, and subscribe. I have to say that. My lawyer told me. Follow us everywhere. Play Anodyne 2. Tell your friend. Play other games. Okay, goodbye. Is that it? Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Thanks for watching.